She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're nothing without me." And the worst part, I believed her. At 40 years old, I was delivering fast food in a beat-up Honda, wondering where my life went wrong. Then one order changed everything. When she said it, it didn't come out like an insult. There was no yelling, no slammed doors, no dramatic build-up like you see in movies. It was quiet, flat, almost casual. That's what made it cut deeper than anything she could have screamed. We were standing in the kitchen, the overhead light buzzing faintly, dishes still in the sink from dinner we barely touched. I remember the smell of something burnt. Maybe the chicken, maybe just the moment itself. And then she looked at me, not with anger, not even frustration, but with this calm, settled certainty. Like she had already made up her mind about me a long time ago, and this was just her finally saying it out loud. "You're nothing without me." For a second, I thought I misheard her. My brain tried to soften it, reshape it into something less brutal. But no, those were the words. Simple, direct, final. They didn't echo right away. They just sat there between us, heavy and still, like the air itself had thickened. I didn't respond immediately, not because I had nothing to say, but because something inside me had paused. Like my mind needed a moment to catch up with what my heart had just taken. I looked at her, waiting for the correction. I didn't mean that. The sigh, the regret, the softening of her face. But none of that came. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, arms crossed, like she had stated a fact. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the words themselves, but the confidence behind them. The way she believed it. And somewhere in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. I wish it had been. Anger would have given me something to hold on to, something to fight back with. But this wasn't that. It was quieter, heavier. It felt like something collapsing inward. Like a building that had been slowly cracking for months, finally giving in all at once. You don't always hear the collapse right away. Sometimes you just feel the dust settling. I started replaying everything in my head almost instantly. The job loss, the rejected applications, the nights I stayed up staring at the ceiling, pretending I had a plan. The mornings I forced a smile in front of the kids, even when I felt like I was disappearing. All those small failures, all those moments of doubt, they suddenly lined up like evidence, like proof that maybe she was right. That's what made it dangerous, because it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like confirmation. I remember glancing down at my hands. They were rough, a little shaky. Hands that used to sign contracts, manage teams, fix problems. Now they were gripping nothing, empty. And in that moment, I didn't see a man going through a hard time. I saw exactly what she saw. A man who had fallen and hadn't gotten back up. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, but mentally. Like my options had shrunk. My voice felt smaller too. I could have argued. I could have reminded her of everything I had done for our family. Everything I had built before things went wrong. But the truth is, I didn't trust my own defense anymore. Because if I said, "That's not true," a part of me would have whispered back, "Then why does it feel true?" That's the kind of damage words can do when they land at the wrong time. If she had said it a year earlier, I probably would have laughed it off or pushed back harder. But she didn't say it then. She said it when I was already questioning myself, when I was already carrying the weight of failure. And instead of bouncing off me, those words sank in, deep. I noticed something else in that moment, too. The way she looked at me. It wasn't just disappointment. It was distance. Like she had already started detaching, already started rewriting the story of who I was in her life. And I wasn't the partner anymore. I wasn't the provider. I wasn't even the equal. I was less. And she had accepted that version of me. The hardest part wasn't hearing it from her. It was realizing I had started to believe it before she even said it. That sentence didn't create the doubt. It exposed it. And once it was out there, it changed the way I saw everything. Every small failure felt bigger. Every success felt temporary, almost meaningless. I started measuring myself through that lens. Every time I picked up a delivery order, every time I checked my bank account, every time I avoided eye contact with someone who used to respect me, that sentence played quietly in the background, reinforcing itself. "You're nothing without me." It didn't need to be repeated. Once was enough. Because the real damage wasn't in the sound of the words. It was in the silence that followed, and what I filled it with. The rain came out of nowhere that night. The kind of desert storm Phoenix gets a few times a year. The sky just opens up like it's been holding everything in too long. Within minutes, the roads were slick, headlights blurred into streaks, and every driver around me slowed down, like we were all suddenly unsure of what we were doing. I was sitting in my car outside a fast food place, engine idling, watching water pool along the curb, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel while the app refreshed over and over again. That's when the order came in. Pickup, cheap burger combo. Distance longer than I wanted. Tip $3. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. $3. After gas, after time, after wear on a car that already sounded like it was falling apart, it barely made sense. My thumb hovered over the decline button. I could wait for something better. Maybe a bigger order, maybe a better tip. But then that familiar thought crept in, the one that had been following me around for months now. What if nothing better comes? That question had started controlling more of my decisions than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just about deliveries anymore. It was about everything. Every opportunity felt uncertain. Every risk felt dangerous. And slowly, I had stopped aiming higher. I had started settling just in case. So I accepted it. The moment I did, I felt that quiet drop in my chest. Not frustration exactly. More like resignation. Like I already knew how the next 30 minutes of my life would feel. Rushed, underpaid, forgettable. But I put the car in gear anyway and pulled out into the rain. The wipers struggled to keep up. They moved back and forth in this uneven rhythm, leaving streaks across the windshield that made it harder to see. Every set of headlights coming toward me turned into a glare. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, trying to focus on the road while water splashed up from passing cars. Inside the car, it was quiet except for the rain and the faint rattle coming from somewhere under the hood. That sound had been getting worse lately. I kept telling myself I'd get it checked when things got better. But when things get better had become this vague, distant idea, not a plan. I picked up the order and placed it on the passenger seat. The bag was warm, the smell of fries filling the car. For a second, it reminded me of easier nights, when grabbing fast food was a choice, not part of survival. When I wasn't calculating every mile, every dollar, every drop of gas. As I drove, I started doing the math in my head. Distance versus fuel. Time versus payout. If I completed 3 more orders like this, maybe I'd clear enough to cover groceries for the next couple of days. Maybe. Everything had become maybe. A red light stopped me at an empty intersection. Rain poured down so hard it bounced off the hood. I just sat there, staring ahead, not even really seeing anything. And that's when it hit me. Not all at once, but slowly. Like a realization I had been avoiding finally catching up. I wasn't building anything anymore. I wasn't working toward a goal, or a promotion, or even stability. I was just maintaining. Just trying to get through the day without falling further behind. Every delivery wasn't a step forward. It was just a way to stay in place. That thought settled heavy in my chest. I used to think of myself as someone who moved forward, no matter what. Even when things got hard, I had direction. I had momentum. But somewhere along the way, I had lost that. And sitting there at that red light, with rain pouring down and a $3 tip waiting on the seat next to me, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had become reactive instead of intentional. The light turned green, but I didn't move right away. A car behind me honked, snapping me out of it. I pressed the gas and kept going, but the feeling stayed. It followed me through every turn, every stop, every glance at the GPS telling me how much farther I had to go. When I finally pulled up to the drop-off location, it was a small apartment complex. Dim lighting, puddles everywhere, numbers barely visible on the buildings. I grabbed the bag, pulled my hood up, and stepped out into the rain. Within seconds, I was soaked. My shoes squished with every step, water seeping in like it had all night to do it. I found the right door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the bag, rain dripping off my sleeves, wondering if I had the wrong place. Then I checked the app. Instructions, leave at door. Of course. I set the bag down carefully, trying to keep it out of the worst of the rain, even though I knew it wouldn't stay dry for long. Then I stepped back, took a quick photo, and marked it as delivered. That was it. No interaction. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just another completed order. I walked back to my car, colder now, heavier somehow. When I got inside, I just sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, water dripping from my jacket onto the seat. The car smelled like wet fabric and fast food. I looked at the app again. $3 tip. I let out a small laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you don't know what else to do. And in that quiet moment, with rain still pounding the roof and the engine idling beneath me, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. I wasn't tired because of the work. I was tired because I didn't see a way out. When he said my name, it didn't feel real at first. It was like hearing something from a different life, a version of me I hadn't been in a long time. Jason. Just one word. Calm. Certain. Familiar. But in that moment, it hit me like a spotlight I wasn't ready for. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders stiffened. My grip tightened around the paper bag, and for a split second, I genuinely considered pretending I didn't hear him. Just hand over the food. Nod, walk away, and let this moment pass like any other delivery. But I couldn't. Because I knew that voice. I looked up slowly, and there he was. Mark Henderson. Same posture, same composed expression, same quiet authority that used to fill meeting rooms. He looked exactly like I remembered. Put together, confident, in control. The kind of man who always seemed like he had the next 5 moves already planned out. And then there was me, standing in a rain, damp jacket, holding a takeout bag, car parked behind me, with a faint rattling engine, and a cracked headlight I hadn't been able to afford to fix yet. I became aware of every detail at once. The way my clothes clung slightly from the rain, the tired weight in my face, the fact that I smelled faintly like fast food and cheap coffee. I felt exposed. Not because he said anything harsh. He didn't. But because of what he represented. He was a direct connection to the version of my life that had collapsed. The job I lost. The stability I used to have. The identity I used to carry without questioning. And now here I was, standing at his doorstep as a delivery driver. There was no way to hide that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just looked at me, trying to process what he was seeing. I could almost see the recognition shifting into realization. Not just, I know this guy, but I know who this guy used to be. And that difference, that gap, it felt massive. What are you doing, delivering food? He finally asked. There was no judgment in his tone. That's what made it harder to answer. If he had been sarcastic or dismissive, I could have pushed back, protected myself with defensiveness. But he wasn't. He was genuinely asking. I shrugged like it was nothing. Life happens. It was the simplest answer I could give. Short, neutral, safe. It didn't invite more questions, didn't expose too much. But inside, there was a lot more behind those 2 words. Job loss, rejection, financial stress, strained marriage, nights spent wondering where I went wrong. None of that fit into a casual response on someone's front porch. He didn't reply right away. He just kept looking at me, like he was trying to read between the lines of what I wasn't saying. And that silence, it stretched. I could feel it pressing on me, pulling things up that I didn't want to face in that moment. Memories of the day I was laid off, sitting in that office, listening to carefully chosen corporate language about restructuring and unavoidable decisions. The handshake at the end, the hollow promise to stay in touch. I had walked out of that building telling myself it was temporary, that I'd be back on my feet soon. Standing there now, it didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like a fall I hadn't recovered from. I shifted my weight slightly, suddenly aware of how long I had been standing there holding his dinner. It felt ridiculous, almost symbolic in a way I didn't like. The man who used to report to him was now delivering his steak and sides, waiting for a tip. That thought hit harder than I expected. For a brief second, something inside me pushed back. A flicker of pride, or maybe frustration. I wanted to say something more, to explain, to justify where I was, to make it clear that this wasn't who I really was, just a phase, just a setback. But the words didn't come, because I wasn't entirely sure anymore. That's what made the moment so heavy. Not his reaction, not the situation itself, but the doubt it brought to the surface. The question I had been avoiding for months, suddenly standing right in front of me. Is this who I've become? I watched his expression carefully, looking for any sign of judgment, pity, disappointment. Anything that would confirm the story I had been telling myself. That people saw me as a failure now, that I had fallen too far. But his face didn't show any of that clearly. It was more complicated than that. Thoughtful, focused, like he was assessing something deeper than just the surface. "Wait here," he said after a moment. That caught me off guard. He turned and walked back inside before I could respond. The door closed, leaving me standing alone on the porch, rain still falling around me. The faint sound of it hitting the roof and pavement filling the space. And just like that, I was left with my own thoughts again. I stood there, not moving, not checking my phone, not rushing back to the car, just waiting and thinking. Part of me wondered if I had done something wrong. Maybe there was an issue with the order. Maybe he was going to come back with a complaint. Or maybe, worse, he was going to come back with sympathy. The kind that feels heavier than criticism. I didn't know which would be harder to take. But beneath all of that, there was something else building quietly. A sense that this moment mattered more than a normal delivery. I couldn't explain it fully, but it felt different. Like something had shifted the second he recognized me. Like the version of my life I thought I had lost was suddenly standing right in front of me again, asking a question I hadn't answered yet. "Who are you now?" When he said, "I made a mistake," I didn't react right away. Not because I didn't hear him, but because my mind didn't accept it immediately. Those words didn't fit the version of reality I had been living in. People like Mark, people in positions of authority, people who make decisions that impact other people's lives. They don't usually come back and say that. They move forward. They justify their choices. They don't revisit them. Especially not to someone who's already fallen behind. So I just sat there, across from him in that quiet office, trying to figure out if I misunderstood what he meant. The room itself felt different from the last time I had been in a place like that. Clean desk, glass walls, everything organized, intentional. It reminded me of the environment I used to belong to, but now it felt like I was visiting it from the outside, like I had crossed into a space that no longer fully included me. I should have fought harder to keep you, he continued. That's when it started to sink in. But even then, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. What I felt first was resistance. A quiet voice in the back of my mind pushing back against it. Because if I accepted what he was saying, it meant I had to confront something I had been avoiding. That maybe I wasn't as disposable as I had started to believe. And that idea felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. For months, I had been operating under a different assumption. That I was replaceable. That losing my job wasn't just about circumstances. It was about my value. I had slowly rewritten my own identity around that belief, adjusted my expectations, lowered the way I saw myself. And now he was sitting across from me, challenging that without even realizing how deep it went. I've been watching what you've been doing, he said. That confused me more than anything else. Watching me. I didn't see how that was possible. My life had become small, routine, almost invisible. Deliveries, long drives, quiet nights. Nothing about it felt like something anyone would notice, let alone pay attention to. He explained it in a way that didn't feel dramatic, just matter of fact. Through mutual connections, occasional updates. The way my name would come up in conversations about reliability, about work ethic, about consistency, even after everything that had happened. At first, I didn't know how to respond to that, because it didn't match how I had been seeing myself. In my mind, I wasn't someone worth noticing anymore. I was just getting through each day, doing what I had to do to survive. There was nothing impressive about that. No achievement. No recognition. But he didn't describe it that way. He started listing things. Not in a rehearsed or exaggerated way, just directly. Discipline. Showing up every day. Maintaining high ratings on delivery platforms. Being consistent, even when the work itself wasn't ideal. Things I had dismissed as basic, as expected, as nothing special. You didn't quit, he said. A lot of people would have. That sentence stayed with me, because I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't framed my situation as persistence. I had framed it as necessity. I didn't see strength in it. I saw lack of options. I saw survival, not resilience. But hearing it from someone else, especially someone whose opinion used to matter in my professional life, forced me to look at it differently. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to create a crack in the way I had been thinking. Still, I wasn't fully convinced. Part of me kept questioning it. Was this just him being polite? Was this some form of sympathy dressed up as opportunity? I had grown used to filtering things that way, assuming there was always a softer version of the truth being presented. Then he leaned forward slightly and said something that shifted the entire conversation. I need someone like that. Not someone like who I used to be. Someone like who I am now. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Because up until that moment, I thought any opportunity I might get would be based on my past experience, my previous role, the version of me that existed before everything went wrong. I thought I had to get back to that level before I could be considered again. But he wasn't talking about that. He was talking about the version of me that had gone through all of it and kept going anyway. That realization didn't come with a rush of confidence. It came slowly, almost cautiously, like my mind was testing it, seeing if it held up under pressure. Operations manager, new division, responsibility, leadership. The words sounded familiar. But they didn't feel like they belonged to me anymore. Not yet. You've already proven you can handle pressure, he added. Just not in a way that shows up on a resume. That line stayed with me in a different way, because it pointed to something I hadn't been able to articulate. The idea that the hardest part of the last few months wasn't just financial. It was mental, emotional. Waking up every day without certainty, without validation, without a clear path forward, and still choosing to move. I had never listed that as a skill. I had never thought of it as something valuable. But sitting there, hearing someone frame it that way, it started to take shape as something real, something transferable, something that didn't disappear just because my job title had. When he finally mentioned the salary, it almost felt secondary. Not unimportant, but not the main thing holding my attention. Because by that point, something else had already shifted. It wasn't about the money. It was about recognition. Not external recognition in the sense of praise or validation, but internal recognition. The moment where something I had lost sight of started to come back into focus. I wasn't starting from zero. I had just stopped seeing what I still had. That's what made the offer feel different. It didn't feel like someone giving me a chance out of kindness. It felt like someone identifying something I had overlooked and putting it back in front of me. Even then, I didn't respond immediately. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't reacting emotionally. I had made that mistake before, jumping into things without fully processing them. But the more I sat there, the clearer it became. This wasn't about going back to who I used to be. It was about moving forward as someone who had been tested in ways I hadn't been before. And maybe that version of me was stronger than I had given him credit for. When I walked through the front door that evening, I already knew something felt different. Not because the house had changed. It hadn't. But because I had. The air inside felt quieter than usual, almost tense. Like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Lauren was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, phone in her hand. The TV was on, but she wasn't really watching it. Just scrolling. Detached, like she was occupying the space without fully being in it. She looked up when she heard me come in, and for a second, there was that familiar expression, surprise mixed with irritation. The kind I had started seeing more often in recent months, whenever I came home earlier than expected, or when something didn't follow the usual routine. "You're home early," she said. Her tone wasn't warm. It wasn't curious either. It was neutral, almost cautious, like she was trying to figure out why the pattern had changed. I closed the door behind me slowly. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't trying to be dramatic or mysterious. I was just aware that whatever I said next mattered in a way it hadn't before. "I got a new job," I finally said. It came out simple, direct, no build-up. For a moment, nothing happened. She didn't react the way I expected. No immediate question, no excitement, no disbelief. Just a pause, like her mind was processing the sentence and trying to place it somewhere it made sense. "A new job," she repeated. I nodded. There was a time when that kind of statement would have been shared immediately, maybe even celebrated. A small moment of relief, maybe hope. But that version of us didn't exist anymore. Too much had happened in between. Too many quiet arguments. Too many financial pressures. Too many moments where we stopped being on the same side of things. I walked further into the room and sat down. Not because I was tired, but because standing felt unnecessary now. Like I wasn't trying to prove anything by posture or presence anymore. She watched me carefully now, not in the dismissive way she had before, but differently. More focused, more alert. Like she was trying to recalibrate her understanding of who I was in that moment. "What kind of job?" she asked. I could hear the shift in her voice now. Subtle but there, less certainty, more curiosity. "Operations manager," I said. "New division." I saw it immediately. The flicker in her expression. The slight tightening around her eyes. Not disbelief exactly, but disruption. Like the information didn't fit the version of me she had built over the past months. She sat up a little straighter. "And the pay?" she asked after a second. I told her. I didn't exaggerate it. I didn't minimize it either. I just said it plainly. That's when something changed in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but noticeable. Her expression shifted from surprise to calculation. Like she was evaluating everything she thought she knew about the situation we were in. The way she had been carrying herself. The assumptions she had been making about stability, about control, about dependence. For a long time, I had felt like the one being assessed in this relationship. Measured, judged, compared against an invisible standard I wasn't meeting. But in that moment, the dynamic felt different. There was silence again. Not comfortable silence, not peaceful silence. The kind of silence where both people are aware that something has just shifted, but neither is ready to define it out loud. I looked at her, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel the need to defend myself, or explain myself, or justify where I had been. That weight had started to lift somewhere between Mark's office and this living room. She finally spoke again, but her tone had softened slightly. "So, this is real." I nodded. It wasn't a question I expected, but I understood it. Because from her perspective, my life had been predictable in its downward trajectory for a while. The idea of a sudden shift upward didn't align with what she had been seeing day to day. But I wasn't the same version of myself she had gotten used to anymore. And she was starting to notice that. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle again, but this time it didn't feel as heavy for me. Something inside had changed. Not everything. Not fully. But enough that I wasn't carrying the same internal pressure I had been for months. I could see her thinking now. Not just reacting, but processing. Reassessing. The way people do when the foundation of a belief starts to crack, even slightly. Because this wasn't just about a job. It was about the narrative that had quietly formed between us. The idea that I had become someone dependent. Someone struggling without direction. Someone whose value had diminished over time. That narrative didn't disappear instantly. But it wasn't as solid as it had been before. She stood up and walked a few steps into the kitchen. Then back again, like she couldn't quite settle. That physical movement mirrored something internal, uncertainty replacing certainty. I stayed where I was. Not because I was trying to assert control or dominance, but because I didn't feel the need to chase validation anymore. That was new for me. I could feel it clearly in how I was sitting there. In how I wasn't rushing to fill the silence with explanations. When she finally looked back at me, her expression was different again. Less sharp, more uncertain. "So what does that mean for us?" she asked quietly. That question landed differently. Not because it was unexpected, but because it carried weight beyond just logistics or money. It was about direction, about identity, about the structure of what we had become during the hardest stretch of our lives. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because I realized I didn't need to define everything in that moment. For a long time, I had been reacting to life, responding, adjusting, trying to keep up. But now, for the first time in a while, I felt like I had stepped back into something closer to control. Not over everything, not over her, not over the past, but over myself. And that was enough to change the tone of the room, without a single argument, without raising a voice, without proving anything out loud.